Yeah. I don't
The
know.
part.
Am I? Maybe we should talk about whether or not we're ready. Hello again, Dr. Shannon.
Hello, Mar.
How are you today, friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. For those of you who have been watching our series, you'll be happy to know my system is back to normal. I've been a week and some change off of, my cannabis love affair. And finally, my body has returned to some sort of stasis, and that's been lovely. Though now I'm finding I can't eat as much, drink as much coffee as I used to. I can't eat as much sugar as I used to. Like, it's amazing how quickly my body has returned and how clear it is that when I am in that state of, being stoned, my body's needs get a little fuzzy. It gets a little unclear sometimes about what I need and how much and what's good and what's not. We were chatting before we recorded this idea of creating space for change, which I think is so crucial to have that giving yourself the gift of listening to yourself and having a little bit of stillness and silence. And I feel like we've been giving people, arming them with the tools of observation and information, which is a really, really great place to start. But at some point, to actively begin to create this change as the sovereign, we're going to have to apply it and we're going to have to start to do some stuff. And I feel like today would be a great opportunity for us to kind of take it to the next stage of, okay, you've decided you want to change. You've started to find information to support you in your change. Now you've got a little bit of traction with just starting to listen and observe. But now you open Pandora's box and there's all sorts of voices and selves and ideas and stories in there. So what I'd love to do today is hopefully give people some context for how they can begin to actually do this and what it can really look like. And you were talking about recently the little wobble. And I love that phrase. Like, we make new changes, we create new habits, and then we think, oh, but maybe I could just smoke that joint one time. What would happen if I did? And I think that's an important thing to bring into the room because we are going to backslide, perhaps. We are going to forget, what sugar does to our body. We are going to have the rose colored glasses of like, oh, but it tasted so good and it wasn't that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I call it the wobble because it takes some of the shame out of it. And each time we wobble back into the decision space, it may be a different scenario and one that we haven't really thought through fully, or we haven't really considered all of the parts in the decision-making process of do we want this thing in our life or not?
Yeah.
And even this weekend, I know that chocolate in these days is a bit too stimulating to me, especially if I have it in the afternoon and evening. But, I had available to me this very wonderful, small, gluten-free vegan cupcake. And, it was very enjoyable, but I was awake all night. And I won't forget that for quite some time now, that even a little cupcake is too much for me.
Yeah. And I think that's so important to, I guess, pull back the curtain for people and say, you and I are going through our own journeys of reclaiming our sovereignty over our health and our body and just our lives in general. To be a human is to be imperfect, is to be fallible. And we're all going to make those mistakes, or not, it's not even a mistake. We're all going to step off the path. We're all going to have that moment of like, was it really that bad? And to your point, you remembered, yes, if I have chocolate after a certain point in the afternoon, I'm going to be up all night.
Yeah. And, you know, it brings me to another situation I had this weekend that maybe in that moment, if I had really listened to all my parts before eating that chocolate cupcake, maybe I wouldn't have made the same decision because I had another decision this weekend where it was a pretty big decision. So I was going through a conscious process of listening to all the parts. And I had very loud voices from the parts who were anxious and the parts who had logic and wanted to make a responsible decision. But I wasn't hearing all of the information. So I knew that I needed to tap into some of the quieter parts that hadn't been made very clear to me because I felt I wasn't coming to a decision or I wasn't coming to an answer that was satisfying.
Hmm.
So I knew there was still more. And I was being very patient with myself in the process of coming to a final decision. One, it was a big decision, and two, I didn't feel settled with the information that was right in front of me and loudest.
Mm,
So partly because this is a habit of mine, and partly because I recently came across a podcast called The Emerald, where they talk about trance and how helpful it can be to put yourself in light states of trance, either with music or drumming or even going in nature. I took myself on a walk to access more of this information. And while I was on my walk, my body began to let me know nothing about the answer, the question I had before me, but it was letting me know that it was tired and fatigued. And that filtered into my decision-making process of about this greater decision of where I would like to settle down for the next 6 months. I realized in that moment, oh, I forgot to ask my body what it wants.
mm,
And when I did that, it was very clear to me that there was only one answer that the body was interested in. And if I had not gone on that walk, if I had not taken the time to slow down and listen to the quieter part, the quieter voice of my body, I certainly could have made a decision using logic or anxiety or many of the other voices I had going on, but I would have been missing that very clear piece that needed to be included.
yeah. Well, and of course, it makes sense now in hindsight that, of course, the body would have an opinion about where you're going to live because the body's going to be there too, right? It's not
Yeah.
like we can just drag the body along and just force it to be. I mean, we could just say, well, you're just going to have to deal with what I've chosen. But what I loved is the first thing about the voices, right? And the loudest voice is not always the correct voice, and the quietest voices are sometimes the most powerful.